I often ask myself what I would do if some kind of emergency struck in Southern California. I don't have a car anymore. I've kind of depend on Ubers and public transportation. And the idea that I have to escape, maybe with my life, is kind of beyond my ability to plan. So the idea that someone was traveling 100 miles on foot to escape some terrible situation, and then later returning 100 miles and going back the same 100 miles is really amazing to me, which I think is why this week's movie, Harriet, struck me so strongly. So we're reviewing that movie on this week's Everyman Movie Review. On my recent trip to New York, I was able to catch Harriet both on the flight to New York and back. I rewatched the last third or so because I felt like maybe I had missed something and my feelings about the movie were a little mixed. I wanted to make sure that I knew exactly what I was going to say for the review. And I do have a lot of thoughts. Some of them may not be very popular amongst people who are watching, and that's going to be okay. But before we dive into that, let's get the pleasantries out of the way. Harriet was written by Gregory Allen Howard and Casey Lemons, and of course, the story is by Gregory Allen Howard, and in turn, it was directed by Casey Lemons. It is starring in the title role of Harriet, Cynthia Erivo, who did an amazing job, and in fact got 2 nominations for Academy Awards this year. One for her role as Harriet, and the other for the song that accompanied the screenplay. She was supported in that role by a multicultural group of actors, probably most notably Leslie Odom Jr. in the role of William Still, Clark Peters and Vanessa Bell Calloway as her relatives, the Rosses, Janelle Monáe as Marie Buchanan, a free woman who helps her along the way, Daphne Reed, who, if I'm not mistaken, we may remember as the first Aunt Viv on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Jennifer Nettles of Sugarland fame, she's a country singer for those of you who don't know, and Mike Marunde as the Broaduses, the owners of Harriet Tubman, and Joe Alwyn as Gideon, their son. And of course, there was a huge cast for this movie. It was black freedmen in Philadelphia and in Baltimore, sailors that helped her along the way. There are, of course, other white people who are much less heroic, I guess, than some of the freedmen who helped them out along the way. But all along the Underground Railroad, we meet other conductors and other safe houses and the people who run them. And each one seems to be manned by an actor playing a character who is pretty dynamic and fantastic. Now, I'm not going to have any spoilers for this particular movie. Most likely you've heard about the life of Harriet Tubman somewhere along the way, hopefully in a very early history class, and then had it repeated to you several times over the course of your life. So this is a story about Harriet Tubman. Any spoilers that may come from this are from her life, and shame on you, you should have educated yourself better. Harriet Tubman actually played a kind of a large role in my life. She was originally born in Dorchester County, and Frederick Douglass was born in nearby Talbot County, both of which border Caroline County, the place where I was born. In fact, the Underground Railroad, the memorial for that, has a stop right there, very near where I grew up. There was a sign posted about the Frederick Douglass birthplace that I passed nearly every day headed to work. The state has done an amazing job at trying to memorialize the struggle that those slaves went through. In fact, the Harriet Tubman Honorary Underground Railroad is a factor in a tourist destination that you can take in Dorchester, Talbot, and Caroline County. In fact, there is a huge mural of her in Cambridge, Dorchester County, which I encourage anyone in the area to check out. And hey, roll on through Caroline County as well and say hi to everyone I know from high school that hasn't left there. But Harriet Tubman was born into slavery. That meant that she was not a person. By the Constitution, I guess she was 3/5 of a person when it came to doing the census, but she certainly wasn't a person when it came to anything else. She was the property of the Broaduses, and she was the property of the Broaduses because her parents were property of the Broaduses' parents. Now, when Edward Broadus's father died, he was the original owner of Harriet Tubman's parents. He had said that upon his death and the expansion of 40 years, all of those slaves should be free. That would, of course, mean that Edward would be forced to free many of his slaves, including Harriet Tubman and her parents. But when that time came, Edward Broadus said, no. Your parents were my property, you are my property, and your children will be my property, and will continue that way forever. Now, that was, of course, before the Civil War. Things would change very drastically in just a few years as all the slaves were emancipated. But that shift from indentured servitude for Harriet, where she thought, I just have to go until this point and then I'll be free, and finding out at that point that no, you're not going to be free. You will remain my property and your children will be my property, drove her to go and seek freedom elsewhere by other means. Now, those means were, of course, her own 2 feet as she ran from Dorchester County to Pennsylvania, Philadelphia specifically, which was the nearest free state. And for those of you who may not know your Civil War history, Maryland was indeed, although a border state, was a slave state. And there were many slaves, not only in the rural areas, but in the urban areas as well. And although Maryland would join the North when it came time for the Civil War, it did so through some inauspicious means, some votes that were taken in rural counties that may or may not have been tampered with to keep Maryland in with the North, in with the United States, partially out of the concern that Washington, D.C., the nation's capital, might have been surrounded by slave states if both Maryland and Virginia left for the Confederacy. But Maryland was not a safe place for slaves when it came time for the Civil War. From that time and those years before, freedom really lied in getting to Pennsylvania and north, so that you would be protected from those slave catchers who may come and get you. So Harriet, using her own 2 feet, made her way the 100 miles north to Philadelphia and to freedom. And for most people, that would be enough. But for Harriet, it wasn't. She wanted to go back and get her family as well. So she returned back to the plantation where she was born and where she was being held in servitude to grab her family and take them back. Unfortunately, on her first trip, she finds out that her husband is no longer her husband. He thought she was dead, so he married someone else. And her family is just too anxious to make the trip. I think her sister has a young child, and most of her family doesn't want to go, including her father, who said he was willing to wait until everyone else left. But she rescues who she can. She shows back up in Philadelphia to the Society for Support of Newly Freed Slaves, and they help to reacclimate the family into society, this time as free people and not as property. Not having done enough yet, Harriet would return, I think, 12 or 13 times to the South to liberate more slaves and take them back north. And she became one of the most famous conductors of the Underground Railroad. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, Rob, listen, thank you for the history lesson, but this is all kind of stuff I knew. Where's the excitement? Where is the movie aspect of this? And that is unfortunately my first problem with the movie. They tried to cover a lot of ground, and they wanted to show Harriet as this heroic leader, which obviously they should. Not only did she free slaves through the Underground Railroad, but when it came time for the Civil War, she did not stop. She continued going into the South. There was a very famous raid on the Combahee Ferry and the Combahee Plantation, where Harriet led not only her own people, but other Union soldiers on a raid of one of the largest plantations in South Carolina. And I believe she freed over 1,000 slaves when they took over that plantation. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, it is the only military activity that was ever led by a woman, because she was the officer in charge at that time. Now, I don't want to fault the filmmakers for this, but it's a huge period of time and a lot is going on. So unless you want to make a 4-hour documentary, then you're going to have to cut some things out. And it did seem like it was jumping from point to point to point to point to point. And that just kind of made it feel disjointed, especially towards the end as we kind of got into the most exciting time of her life. The beginning, when we talk about her leaving the plantation, what was plantation life first? What was plantation life like first? And then how she escaped the first time, reacclimating to society, and then deciding to go back. That was a great story, and it seemed very well done. But then, every time she made a trip back, it just seemed to jump cut, and it felt so disjointed that it really took me out of the movie. There was also a little bit of this weird religious, but pagan and spiritual kind of thing too as well. Now, Harriet always said that she felt that God talked to her. She was kicked by a horse, I think, when she was younger, and she had a scar on her head. But she said after that point that God spoke to her directly and that he gave her direction. Now, she always said that when she left, it was her feet that carried her, even though God gave her the directions on where and when to go. And when she returned, she always felt the same way, that God would lead her in the way that would make sure she would get back safely, and that's why she was never caught. But they tried to intertwine that in this story, and it didn't really felt like it had a place. Maybe it was an afterthought that this woman believed that God was speaking to her. It didn't feel like it fit the rest of the narrative, and it felt like the narrative was very disjointed as we moved towards the end. It's just like, hey, she's returning to Philadelphia with more slaves. Hey, she's going back out. Hey, she's coming back. Hey, she's going back out. Hey, she's coming back. And And we missed kind of the thing that I loved about the first and the beginning of the second act, where we got to see that adventure of trying to escape. There was one part where they're coming out on a wagon, I believe, and they are confronted by some slave catchers, and the girl who's on the wagon top, who's very fair-skinned, has to talk her way out of it. And Harriet says, just talk like your master. You've been listening to him for all these years. Just pretend that you're them. And they get past and they get out. And that part of the story we see. Also, the raid on the Combahee Ferry, we also see a little bit of that as they approach and they kind of take over, but it really has to cover so much time that it's so disjointed. And I wish that they had maybe just skipped some of those things and made it a concise narrative a little bit more, just so that it didn't feel so jumpy towards the end. Also, I'm not really a huge fan of movies that get preachy, and although this is a topic that really deserves to be a documentary and have all of the facts and all the history, and in that way get a little preachy, especially given the circumstances we're under now in 2020, but I think that don't try to mix that in. Don't try to entertain me with a fantastic story and like a narrative build in the beginning, and then switch to a documentary where we hit every single point of her life, and you preach at me about all this stuff. It felt like it was two different movies at the first half and the second half. And that's why I rewatched the second half again, just to be sure that it wasn't me being tired or watching on a plane or missing something, that this was actually the movie that was produced. And I think that it was. This was their intent. And listen, you're a filmmaker, you can make any movie you want, but for me, it just lost something there at the end. Now, I do not want to discount the performances of Cynthia Erivo or any of the actors. They were all amazing. And in fact, her in the title role there, I can think of no one better right now who could play that. Janelle Monáe in her role, fantastic. Leslie Odom Jr. in his role as kind of like a nerdy Freeman who wants to get all the histories of everyone. I'm with it. All of it I enjoyed, but I kind of enjoyed it as islands in an otherwise kind of boring second half of the movie. And obviously it's hard for me, again, as a cis white man, to really relate to that story. Ironically, I probably would relate more to Gideon, who was a son trying to impress his father and wanting to find some way to show himself to be a real man. I wonder what that says about my relationship with my dad. I'm not going to say that it wasn't enjoyable. It was enjoyable. And for what it was, which was burning 2 hours of a 5-hour flight transcontinental, it was really good for that. But I think if I had gone to a theater and seen it, I would have not had the same feeling, and I think that if I'd spent money especially to see it, I probably would feel way different about this. There is a place for adaptations of historical movies and stories, and there's a place to take a documentary and kind of make it into a narrative so that we can watch it like a real movie. I just don't think that Harriet nailed either one of those things exactly, and it's really tragic, because otherwise it was a fantastic movie with a really great cast. I just think you have to pick one of those things. Are we going to tell this like a historical narrative and say everything that happened and not miss anything and be factually accurate? Or are we going to make a dramatization of this and make it more of a flowing story and skip some of the things to try and sacrifice them for the film overall? They didn't do either. They did one for one half and one for the second half, and it just made it feel like it didn't make it less enjoyable, because I like history and I like those movies, but I think it made for most people a movie that they're not going to want to go see. So let's ask ourselves our typical questions. Is this movie for you? Well, if you enjoy history, especially Civil War era history, I think you're going to love this movie, and it is factually accurate so far as I can tell, and I think that for people who are into that kind of thing, they're really going to enjoy it. But for your average moviegoer, someone who's just going to be entertained at the movie, and even though it's a historical story, you still want to have those same kind of points so that it feels familiar, I don't think you're going to like it. I think you're going to find yourself bored, especially through the second half of the movie, and not give it the attention it deserves. I think I did that on my first watching, and I don't really want to ever treat a film like that, and I never want to recommend a movie to all of you to go see that I don't think you can just sit and enjoy. This is a complicated movie, and although not every movie that I recommend is very simple, some of them are very, very complicated, and you really have to be on all the time in order to enjoy it. I think this movie just missed the mark too much for me to say everyone should go see it. If you're a history buff, especially if you like Black history in America, especially if you like Civil War history, you're gonna love this. The way that they dramatize a lot of the things that I'd only read in books or been taught in my history class was amazing. The way that the sailors worked with her, the raid on Combahee Ferry, All of those things were amazing to see play out in front of me. But I am a different kind of person. If I wasn't as into history as I am, if I didn't enjoy those documentary style things, I don't think I would have enjoyed this movie at all. So if you don't, I don't think you will, and you should probably skip it. But as I saw it on a plane, obviously it's available many places, including your local airliner for your long distance trips. So if you are one of those people who likes that kind of historically based movie, and you don't mind that it feels a little disjointed in the effort of telling the story completely accurately, then this movie may be for you, and take the 2 hours to go watch it. Otherwise, it's probably a skip. And once again, I have watched a movie so that you don't have to. So there you have it, another episode of the Everyman Movie Review in the books. Right at the top here, I want to thank my patrons over at Patreon. I could not do this without you guys. Like I said at the top of the episode, and I keep saying I'm having new equipment delivered, it seems like all the time. I just got a set of Samson CO2 pencil condenser microphones that are hopefully improving the audio quality immensely. Cameras are coming in, lights are coming in, new computers, new software, everything. I could not do that without you. And of course, the moral support. There's nothing better than getting a message that just says, hey, keep it up, or I'm listening, I'm subscribed, I'm loving the content. That kind of stuff just keeps me motivated and keeps me going. And my patrons are on the front line of the people doing that. So thank you to all of you guys. And if you want to be one of the chosen few, it's so easy. Go on over to patreon.com, that's patreon.com/Robert N. Cheek. And for as little as $1 a month, you too can become a supporter of mine. You get shout outs in all the books and the videos like I'm doing right now. Basically in any of my projects, I mention and give thanks to the people who support me on the front lines. And while you're cruising around the interwebs, don't forget that the Everyman Movie Review is available on social media now. You can check it out on Instagram, on Twitter, and on Facebook. All of those links are going to be found down below in the description. Make sure you check it out. Come and join the community. Say hello to everyone who follows along. Send me a message. Let me know what you think about this particular podcast or YouTube episode, whatever it is you're watching, however you're consuming it. And speaking of that, it's available in both. You can find the videos at youtube.com/Rob Cheek, and you can find the podcast episodes at anchor.fm/Everyman Movie Reviews. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you leave a comment below and let me know what you think there as well. And while you're here, hit the like button, let everybody know that you like the video, and maybe subscribe to let you know when the next video is out. If you're listening on Anchor, go on over to anchor.fm/Everyman Movie Review/message. That'll let you send me a voicemail or a text, and if you want, I can actually play it right on the podcast version of the show to let everybody know what you think about my review of this movie. And of course, if you want to find me on social media, all of my accounts across all the social media are at Robert N. Cheek. That's going to be Instagram, Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter, Snapchat, everything at Robert N. Cheek. You can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/Rob Cheek. Working on changing that hopefully soon. And of course, don't forget robertncheek.com, where you can find everything about me and all the stuff that I'm working on. And you can sign up for the mailing list to be the first to know about all the new projects before they come out. And if you can't get enough of me, why would you? You can join me every single Tuesday, where me and my buddy Corey do the OD Anthem podcast. We talk about news, we talk about sports, we talk about events happening around the world, especially here in LA where we currently live, and back in Baltimore, our home away from home. New episodes of that podcast are available every Tuesday. You can find the video version at youtube.com/ODAnthem, and it's available in podcast form on all your podcatchers, but the easiest one, of course, anchor.fm/ODAnthem. And finally, thank you as always for checking out this show. New episodes are available every single Thursday, as well as one day in between, Sunday or Monday, usually, generally. You can find a new episode as well. I try to do a little bit mix of new movies and a little bit of old movies, stuff I find on streaming, either on Amazon or HBO or anywhere that I can find it, Netflix. But you also see a lot of new movie reviews from stuff that's still in the theaters, and maybe even second-run theaters, because I'm a huge proponent of the second-run theater. So make sure you join us next time for the next review. And of course, we got more projects coming all the time over on YouTube. A new episode of Rob Explains Everything is coming very soon. I'm getting ready to shoot that, in fact. So make sure you check out that as well. And until then, of course, have a great week, everybody.